Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar titled Doors, Windows, Glazing and Rooflight Manufacturers, How to Get Specified. We're going to be taking a look at fenestration packages generally. So if that's something that you're involved with in your business, then hopefully this webinar will be useful to you. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. All attendees' microphones are muted. If you've got any questions, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A in the webinar and we will respond to you afterwards. We do like to respond to all questions. This will usually be by a follow-up email. If you'd like to find out more from what you've seen today, you can visit thembs.com or just drop us a note at info@thembs.com. The speakers for today are myself, Lee Jones. I'm the head of manufacturer solutions at MBS. I've been with the company now for around 4 years, but prior to that, I was in the construction product manufacturing sector for 20 plus years. Long-standing customer of MBS's, and I've dealt with a lot of specification of various different construction products. So if you've got any questions relating to that or experiences of it, again, please feel free to drop us a note and we'll get back to you. Alongside myself is my colleague Paul Swaddle. Paul Swaddle is Chartered Architect and is currently the head of technical solutions for MBS. So similarly to myself, Paul is the go-to person in regards to information, industry updates, etc., for the architectural side of the MBS business, whilst I will look after the manufacturing side. If you've got any questions for Paul, again, please feel free to drop those in the chat. Just a little bit about MBS. MBS are part of the Big Factor Group, a Swedish technology firm that operate internationally. We've just got a quick snapshot here of the businesses that they operate in Europe, but they do also have a lot of presence in North America, Canada, Australia, Southeast Asia, and a few other territories as well. In the UK, MBS are one of their businesses alongside our sister company, Glazing, and there's a lot going on in the background at the moment between MBS and Glazing to tie the analytics together. So keep an eye out for that. It's going to be quite powerful, I think, what's coming forward. MBS is a technology platform for the construction sector. So we provide a solution that can connect specification information. So by this, it's usually the people that are writing specifications, so architects, designers, specifiers, contractors, consultants, you name it, anybody that's involved with the written specification process will be using our tools, which is MBS Chorus, which we're going to show you later today. But alongside that, we connect manufacturers through both MBS Chorus, but also MBS Source, which is our online search platform for construction products, to get those into the specification. So our customers are your customers, and we feed the whole project timeline. If you, like many businesses, are considering your environmental practices and your impact on the industry, obviously the construction sector is responsible for around 40% of all global carbon emissions. Dealing with MBS can leave you with the knowledge that you know you're not going to be increasing your footprint. MBS was recently awarded PAS 2060 certification, which is the standard for the demonstration of carbon neutrality, and we've done that across all of the scopes of the greenhouse gas protocol. So scopes 1 and 2, which are our owned and controlled emissions, so company fleet, energy use, that kind of thing, but also across scope 3. So this is things like business travel, our web services, employees working from home and commuting, and a lot more. We've been investing heavily in reforestation local to where we are to contribute to the local environment, but we've also been investing in international carbon reduction schemes as well. So those things combined alongside our emission reduction strategy, compared to where we were 3 years ago, we're now operating with a 56% reduction in our emissions, and those residual ones have been offset to achieve the carbon neutral status. What we're going to cover today, we're going to have a look at the MBS user demand for fenestration products. So if you're new to MBS, we're going to give you some insights as to how many specifications effectively are being written using these types of products. We're going to look at what is a specification. If you're not used to dealing with the specification side of the sales process, we'll give you a quick overview of what that is, and my colleague Paul's going to give you a demonstration hands-on from an architect's perspective of how a specification would be written. We'll give you some hints and tips on how you can target specifiers, look at some safety and sustainability considerations, and then we'll look at an architect's view and the requirements from that. So fenestration and specification. In the MBS platform, today, MBS, it's the National Building Specification. We are responsible for the majority of the application for written specifications. So if somebody's not using the MBS platform to write a specification, they'll likely be a small practice that might be writing their own in Word or something like that. But there's no competition spec tool out there. So we've got a very, very good view from our 50 years of experience of doing this within the industry of what's going on. And just a quick snapshot here of a typical month from this year. There was over 2,500 windows and roof lights specified in that particular month, and over 3,500 doors, shutters and hatches. So there's a high demand there within the spec. Some of these are manufacturers that are gaining prescriptive specifications. So the architect, designer, consultant, etc., is specifying the exact manufacturer. But there are also a number where at the moment it might not be a product available within the platform that has been left open. So there's a lot of scope there for manufacturers to get their products into the written specification, which ultimately strengthens that potential of going through to the sale. In 2021, last year, we had over 50,000 projects that were live through the system, and it's only growing year on year. There's a big boom, obviously, within the construction sector at the moment, regardless of some of the difficulties that are happening, particularly in residential, where there's a lot that needs to be built. And obviously, the key thing with fenestration is that, one, it's a commodity product. Every building has windows, doors, and some have cladding and with curtain walling, etc., within there too. But it's a visual thing. So from a design perspective, getting this early on in the process is absolutely key, and MBS can provide you with the analytics to that from getting into the specification in the early doors. Our typical users, which I've touched on briefly, are architects, contractors and consultants. And by these, we don't necessarily just mean the specific professional qualification, but the businesses. So within the architectural practice, you might have an architectural technologist, you might have the architect, you might have a person that's just appointed to do written specifications if it's a larger practice. Contractors, various stakeholders, from if it's design and build, they might have more control over the spec, quantity surveyors, etc., but also consultants. Particularly with larger projects, we're seeing very heavily influence decisions from consultants on things like cost is an obvious one, but then also down to safety and sustainability considerations if the specific outcomes that are required, and it all influences the spec. So these businesses all use the platform to actually provide those written specifications. The platform's used across all sectors, from education to healthcare, leisure, commercial, hotels, etc., right through to residential. This could be an entire high-rise residential block, a whole housing estate, or even down to the small refurb. Our specification tools are available at different levels, and we also have a small works package that's used by a lot of the smaller practices that are engaging in refurbishments. So whatever project you're working on, or whatever project areas that you target, or what your products are suitable for, there are specifications being written in the MBS platform along the same vein as those. So where do these professionals start when they're looking for things? So likewise with anything that you might do in your own life, you can easily go from manufacturer website to manufacturer website. Digital research is primarily the highest research type now for people when they're considering anything. If you only got to think about maybe ordering a takeaway or something at home, or booking a holiday, everything's done online now. And likewise with things like car insurance, etc., there's comparison sites where people can go to one single entity and look at multiple different providers instead of having to spend 10 times more of their own time going and looking in different places. And MBS Source is our solution that does that. It was previously our IBA product selector, if anybody might be familiar with us from a few years back. But we modernized product selector. It was relaunched as MBS Source, and today it's used by thousands of specifiers to do their research, to look at construction products, manufacturers, case studies when they're gaining influence, etc. We're going to give you a live demo of this later in the presentation, but it just thought it'd be useful to drop a note there and just let everybody know where the research is beginning. So that said, how does specification work? Well, firstly, what is a specification? Apologies if this is something that you've been working with for a while, but for anybody that's new, a specification is the prescriptive and descriptive document that goes alongside technical drawings or 3D models, etc., that actually lists how a building should be built, what the materials are that go into it, and what the outcomes should be at the end of that. Before 1973, there was not really any standard way of doing this, and specifications were a bit of a mess, to be honest. They were different on every single project. So there was a few members of the RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects, that pulled together and developed what was referred to as the National Building Specification, which is who we are still to this day. It started off as a set of binders, and we've got a image there looking back from the early 70s of the first publication of this, showing the processes, best practice, etc. But there was also sheets that the specifiers could use. They could cross out bits of information that they didn't want to add bits of information in, which was really the very early form of a product data template. Today, we've gone through all the iterations of floppy disk, CD-ROM, downloadable software. Everything's on the cloud now, so there's nothing to install. The people that are writing the specification just go to MBS Chorus, which is just available through searching it through Google or going direct to the web link if you've got it in your bookmarks. Log in with their credentials and they can start to write these specifications and pull the manufacturer's components through directly from MBS source. I mentioned descriptive and prescriptive specifications and I think it's maybe just good to give an overview of what the difference is there. So a descriptive specification is the general performance requirements of what's included for the system, but it might be down to the specialist contractor to be responsible for the what and how, or even the who. So by that, we might say that the person that's written the descriptive specification might say we need a window system that's got fire performance of X, thermal performance of Y, and acoustic properties of Z. But it's down to the specialist contractor to decide what products and materials they go for, how they're installed, and ultimately which manufacturer they procure those from. A prescriptive specification goes one step further, and today, particularly around sustainability and fire safety credentials, is becoming more and more important to achieve early on in the project. Certain manufacturers have USPs with their products. A lot of them have specific performance criteria that aren't available from other manufacturers' products and systems. So a prescriptive specification will go one step further than descriptive. It still includes that, but it will actually say who the product is, what accessories, etc., they come from, what manufacturer it's coming from, and what the product references and SKU. So what's happening there is they're actually specifying the manufacturer's product exactly with all of their exact performance criteria. From a value engineering perspective, if there's a prescriptive spec in there, that does add a different level of strength to the specification and ultimately which could lead to the sale. Because matching a descriptive specification, it's quite possible then to go out and see different manufacturers that might have similar credentials. But if you've specified an actual manufacturer's product with exact performance requirements, so it might be a 0.18 U value and an FR30 rating or something like that. It might be made of a certain material with a certain finish to give the visual appearance that the designers got within their ideas for the overall concept. Then going and trying to find something exactly the same as that can be quite complex. So prescriptive specifications are more robust, but they're also they make it a lot more easy for the manufacturer to ensure that sale can be followed through. There's a number of ways that you can target specifiers. So it's not just all about getting into the written specification, although that is the end game in a lot of cases. There's a lot of awareness that goes on. So what we've got here is the MBS specification marketing cycle. We've got a little document chart that you can download at the mbs.com for free on this. So if you want to take a little bit of a look at this afterwards, there's a lot more information on the download. But obviously for the PowerPoint presentation that I'm doing today, it needs to be simplified a little bit for the screen. So again, you can go to the mbs.com and download that for free if you'd like to. Around the outside of this circle, the coloured bars indicate the different stages of the RIBA plan of work. So the different stages of the construction project and what that goes through in its life. So at the early stages, concept design stage, for example, or maybe the design brief and so forth, there's a lot of awareness that goes on. Now, this is where people will start to look at certain products, materials, if they're considering, yeah, we want a building and we want it to be the most sustainable project that we've ever worked on in the past, for example. There's going to be certain criteria that is required of that, and it's only achievable through the use of the materials, systems, products that go into it. So they'll start to do some research, quite likely through MBS source, but also for the architectural practices, CPD is a big thing. Now, MBS facilitate RIBA CPD. So if you're looking at providing CPD to the architectural community, please have a chat to us. It's the only CPD that's accredited by the Royal Institute of British Architects. Coincidentally, a chartered practitioner has to do 35 hours a year minimum to gain a minimum of 100 points to remain chartered through the CPD process. And if they do an RIBA CPD, it actually gives them double points. So there's a lot of benefit there. But through our latest CPD report, which you can download for free at the mbs.com, it actually demonstrates the value of RIBA CPD to the recipients and the fact that it can be trusted. It's not sales pitch, it's very educational, but ultimately can be delivered by those manufacturers to get their foot in the door and build that relationship. When we get to stage 2, so the concept design stage, moving into spatial planning, interest starts to pick a little bit more now. The original outline has been defined and people start to look at how we can actually make this design intent work. So this might be your website that they'll be looking for information for. Again, it could be MBS source. But I think one of the key things to note there is they're going to be looking for things like literature. So in particular case studies, what projects these materials, products, etc. have been used on in the past, because it might be something that's new to them. They might just be looking for influence. As with anything that we do as a human being, when it comes to design, influence is a key thing within this, and manufacturers' literature and case studies plays a big part in this. Then getting into stage 3 and stage 4, the selection comes into place. So the specification starts to become more developed now at this particular point. And this is really where MBS source and MBS cores comes into its own. MBS source will list all of your products, and it will also attribute all of the information regarding those products, but in the MBS data templates. Now, what that means is that when it gets to the written specification process that's handled in Chorus, and again, we're going to show you this in a live demo later down the line, your products can literally just be added to the spec. It's pre-formatted and it auto-populates the specification for the specifier. At stage 4, that specification is finalized. So as a manufacturer, if you're not in the spec at that point, it's going to be quite difficult to get into the project further down the line. And then stage 5, the construction and purchase routes. The specifications used there quite heavily by QS and everybody that's involved in doing the procurement, subcontractors, merchants, etc. As that key kit list of parts to actually procure all the materials that are required for the site. And then lastly, re-engagement. You can feed this information back into CRM. This can be built up for relationships with the specifiers to keep that ongoing momentum and making sure that you're considered for those projects moving forward. Just some key stats on the amount of users within the MBS platform. We've got well over 1,000 manufacturers on MBS source, so this is individual businesses. I think it's closer to the 1,500 mark, to be honest, but this is responsible then for around hundreds of thousands of construction products, right through from civils and landscape to structural MEP type things through to the building envelope, fixtures and fit out, and of course fenestration. From the specification tool perspective, we've got just under 4,000 practices that use this. Now that's individual businesses. Many of these have multiple seats, multiple licenses of the software. So if we look at a large practice, I don't know, say BDP, for example, they will have multiple seats. So that this again is thousands upon thousands of users that are using the platform on a daily basis. Mentioned this one previously, but we typically have over 50,000 projects in a given year. But we also have a services library where people can actually gain access to standards, etc., that is linked to the specification to ensure that things are being created as effectively and as robustly as they can. And again, we've got well over 1,000 subscribers to that too. Just going to look at a little bit of an industry update. So some of the external factors that are impacting specification at the moment, and I think the first one is obvious, it's building safety. The Building a Safer Future report was released in 2018, so it's coming up to 4 years ago now. And that's actually led to two significant things for construction and particularly manufacturers such as yourselves. Firstly being the Building Safety Act. So the bill achieved royal assent on the 28th of April this year. So it's now a legally binding document and it's now referred to as the Building Safety Act 2022. Over the next 18 months, we're going to see more and more implementations come as a result of that as the transition period moves on. Notably, stage gates are being introduced. Stage gate 1 was actually introduced last year, where you need an EWS1 form at the planning stage for a safety critical building. But moving forward, stage gate 2 is going to evaluate the as-built design and the as-built specification and ensure that these things are tied together. And then at stage gate 3, prior to the finished building being handed over, the as-built information is going to be assessed to the as-built specification and design and what was there previously. So specifications are really being strengthened. They need to be to ensure that what we're adding into buildings is what was intended and is accurate. But then notably as well for manufacturers, the Code for Construction Product Information was recently launched. You can find more about this at cpi.org. .uk website. This focuses on manufacturers' product information. Now, one of the arguments that came from some of the findings of all of this review of the construction processes over the past few years is that manufacturers' information can often be quite misleading, particularly when it's held in catalogues on the manufacturer's website, etc. Not usually intended, but for a marketing perspective, it can be quite easy to oversell the product and not focus on the accuracy and making sure that the data is structured and it's clear and ambiguous to use. So the code's been launched to combat that, and manufacturers can get their products, their businesses certified against the code to show that they're doing best practice. But great news for anybody that has got MBS source listings. A lot of what the code's asking for, the MBS source website and how we list products against our data templates actually already aligns to a hell of a lot of that. If you visit the mbs.com on the manufacturers section, we've got a free download, which is a review of the Code for Construction Product Information. So it's sort of an executive summary, but then we actually go through each of the clauses within it and show where the MBS platform aligns. So if you'd like to read more about that, you can visit the CPI website or you can take a look at the review at the mbs.com. The code itself goes through 11 sign-off processes that the manufacturers have to adhere to, but it ultimately revolves around 5 acid tests. So there's a leadership and culture survey even. This is more about how you conduct business and the ethics around your business. So it does actually go a lot further than just this is how the product information is listed on our website. There's a management and systems questionnaire, so how your processes and your audit trails internally within your business are dealt with. There's an organizational assessment, and then it goes into the product set submission. So this is product A, B, C, D, whatever, and how all of the information is structured against that. And then it goes finally through to verification. So it's as much about how you conduct your business as as well as how you actually provide and surface the information that's the result from that. The reason for this is obviously it can be quite easy with how busy everybody can be to not keep information up to date or to not have an efficient process internally. So one of the things I think that might be noted from this is why it might seem a little bit daunting. It can actually make your business more efficient internally by highlighting some of the maybe key sort of failing points that you might have, which can only make you more profitable if you're operating more efficiently internally. So well worth a look at. And again, you can see our review on that at thembs.com. Arguably as important, between safety and sustainability, it's quite difficult to depict which one is more crucial. But obviously with sustainability, unless we do more now, there's not going to be a planet anywhere to build, or a human race for that case, actually, if we leave it to get any further. Global warming is on the rise continuously. The last IPCC report was pointing towards the fact that we've likely missed the 1.5 degrees limit that we need to do to keep places habitable around the world. This is going to see a lot of disposition for people all over the planet. We're already seeing a lot of tragedies happening, even local to ourselves, flooding, fires, you name it. I'm actually sitting on this webinar today, and I think it's about 25 degrees inside the room that I'm sat in, and there's no heating on. So yeah, it's getting worse and worse. As a construction sector, we need to do more, particularly around carbon. And there's a few documents that can help guide you on this. There's the RIBA 2030 Climate Challenge. This was launched a few years ago, but it's recently been revised to version 2. The initial publication aligned quite closely to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but through the new version, it's been given a lot more priority and focus towards reducing operational carbon, but also whole life carbon and embodied carbon within the built environment. There was the Climate Change Act, which is focusing on reducing emissions across all businesses and sectors throughout the UK. Every country pretty much in Europe and quite a number of them around the wider world as well have actually got similar processes where we're looking at reducing carbon, transition to renewable energy, using recycled materials, so forth. It's not just about your products. If you're a manufacturer, your business can be assessed. The beginning of the webinar, I mentioned about how MBS are now officially carbon neutral. It's something that you could get involved with yourself. At minimum, you have to have your scope 1 and 2 emissions. So for most people, that will be the purchase of heat, natural gas, electricity, and your company fleet. And you can assess that against the PAS 2060 standard. But to do it properly, really, you need to be considering scope 3, because that's where the largest proportion of your emissions will likely come. And then likewise, in the design specification side of things, Part L of the building regulations has just been revamped. It was actually launched in 2021, but it came into law on the 15th of June this year. So this is now legally binding. And I think some of the key things to know there, particularly around residential, is that buildings have got to be 31% more energy efficient now than they previously have been, which I think takes the energy efficient rating up to a B, I think, as a minimum, where it originally started as an E. It slowly progressed through there. There's a lot more involved in it around passive measures, and a lot of the guidance now seems as though it's moving towards a passive house type standard. Obviously for fenestration, this is a key player in the design of the passive measures. So making sure that the windows, doors, etc. are thermally efficient are absolutely paramount in this. So specifiers are looking for this information, and the more you can list around your sustainability credentials, the higher the opportunity is that you're going to get the spec. We've got some examples here of those passive measures. So by passive measures, we're looking at the building envelope, its orientation to the sun, and how it can reduce energy loss via that. So utilizing natural heating and cooling from the sun and its geographical location, its orientation, to relieve the demand on things like lighting and radiators and so forth. And again, fenestration, as you can see there in the highlighted red bit, plays a really, really big part in ensuring that thermal conductivity is reduced. So how can you help specifiers? Well, the first part, and I think when we were reviewing the code for construction product information earlier, sort of suggests this, ensure your product data is digitized as the first part. People will be looking for this online primarily. We've got a lot of research that can back this up if you're interested. Take a look at some of the reports, such as the digital construction report that we've got on the MBS. But it needs to be structured. So by digital, we don't just mean a PDF uploaded to your website or a bit of text and some nice fancy images. It needs to be structured so people can look for things, find the information that they need easily, and then transpose that into the documentation that they're working on. And it needs to be readily available. So ease of access is a key thing for people. Aligning your products to the relevant MBS specification templates, obviously, if you're considering specification as a must. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're in the MBS source platform, MBS source, and our technical team in the background will actually structure that for you from your data. Providing third-party certification can help reassure specifiers. So if you're making performance claims, having third-party independent verified testing to back that up obviously strengthens those claims. It might be that somebody's claiming certain performance criteria around sustainability credentials, for example, and having an EPD that goes against that can obviously help you verify that that's the case. Promote the life cycle value of products. So it's not all about how does the product perform once it's in a situation or how much does it cost. It's how long is it going to last? What can we do with it once the building's demolished or it's end of life? Can it be recycled? That kind of thing. And then lastly, BIM content. So it's something that we tend to not to talk about too much today. I think some manufacturers have obviously had BIM sort of pushed on them quite heavily, but MBS can facilitate BIM content. However, it is quite widely used. It's about 75% adoption rate now in the UK. So the chances are that any project that you're working on, there'll be some form of BIM software at a minimum that'll be being used to design that. And having the 3D objects with the data in the background can be beneficial to help you get in the spec. From my experience as a manufacturer, when we were adopting BIM sort of 10 years ago, what we found was it was helping us to get those analytics much earlier than we were getting previously, because particularly with building envelope products, the concept design that has to be conveyed to the client before it can move into any of the later stages requires those objects to be added to the model to give the visual appearance to sign off the overall design. So big thing to consider. And likewise, we've got a team of experts that are responsible for creating the BIM content internally, and I'll show you where we host those on the platform in the demo in a little while. So specifying with MBS, we're going to switch now to a live demonstration. So I'll just switch my screen and give you an overview. So we're going to show you two things. First one is MBS source, which I'm going to run through, and then I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, Paul Swaddle, who's going to obviously introduce himself, but give you a run through of how the specification process works within the MBS Chorus platform. So what you can see on the screen now is MBS source. This is MBS's online search directory for construction products. We've got a few helpful sort of documents on here, so videos of how MBS source works. I've got a log of my recently viewed products. We've got the option for featured manufacturers, so some promotional opportunities there, featured products, popular categories, and then we've got some helpful sort of information down at the bottom, a few documents and links of different bits of guides that you can maybe take a look at, some testimonials, and then some free to download tools, particularly around BIM. All of the MBS content that we build from a digital object perspective is built to the MBS BIM object standard, which is fully aligned to the ISO 19650 series of standards and all the other relevant ones. We've got the plugin, so the MBS BIM content can be downloaded directly from within the software, but also the specification can be written directly within the software. And we've got plugins for Revit, ArchiCAD, and Vectorworks. We've got Bentley EcoSim coming later in the year as well. And alongside that, if you're building Revit content, we've got some shared parameters files that you can use to actually add the data in if you're considering doing those yourselves. But what that'll do is structure the data to the MBS requirements. So this is source. You can search by category. So by this, we'd mean all the different types of construction product sections that you might be looking for. You can filter by manufacturer, search that way if you like. But typically most searches tend to be generic, organic even. So you can go in here and you can search for things. So if I'm looking for, I don't know, say curtain walling, we can type that in there. You can take a look and you can see we've got 210 products that have come back from curtain walling. We can happily go through all of these. We can filter down by specific types. So all of the products are classified by MBS to the relevant uniclass and cause sections, which we'll touch on in a moment. You can also filter by third-party certification. So likewise with any sort of website that you might use as a consumer in your day-to-day life, like John Lewis or something, all these filters are available on your left-hand side to actually narrow down that search that you want. Goes into manufacturer, those that have got digital objects. So if you're working on a BIM project, you could click and just see the ones that have got the BIM files for those. General sort of information, and then environmental properties. We do request a lot more environmental properties than what you can see there from the manufacturers. But as with the majority of the industry, it's going to be a little bit of time till people have got things like embodied carbon, etc., as a standard data set to actually provide to us. So again, if you've got this kind of information and you're listing on source, it's going to clearly aid you with the specification process. We take a look at one of the products. I'll just pick on the first one. We can scroll down and see what this is. So the first thing that we have is the image and the product description. We can go to the manufacturer's landing page here. We can contact the manufacturer directly from this platform if we want to. You'll note we've got this little button here called Add to Spec, and Paul will show you how products are added to the specification in the chorus demo in a moment. But ultimately what that does is you click on it, it copies the information that's on this page and allows the specifier to paste it directly into the specification. Moving forward, and this is where we were referring to the data being digital and structured. So by digital, we were actually referring to machine readable. So what we've got is a set of properties and then information that's attributed to those in a structure. Every construction product has its own individual data template within the MBS platform, and we'll structure that information, which one makes it easy for the specifier to look at certain products. They can compare things a lot more in a much more simpler way, but ultimately it allows them then to reuse that information and find the information that they need a lot more efficiently. So application is important. This is obviously for use as a curtain walling system, but if it was something like insulation, for example, where you're buying a roll of material, or paint is another great one, you might not know what materials or particular substrate it's suitable for the insulation. Would you know if it was going into a wall, floor, loft, ceiling? There are different materials for different uses, and the application can be quite important in making that decision. Then go into a very general description of the product, where it is, what it does, some of the features and benefits and performance criteria around that. We'll then go into general information. So this is asked for of every construction material and product and system that goes into the platform. It just powers some of the filters. So there could be the key color, the key finish, material, and so forth. But that then very quickly moves into the specification. So in this particular case, if you're a curtain walling manufacturer, you'll be likely familiar with the H11 section in the common arrangement of work section. So if you're dealing with MBS building specs, you would likely have seen a H11 110 spec. You may have even written those for some of the architects or consultants, contractors, etc., that you work with. But today we are classifying everything to uniclass as a primary classification, and then adding the course classification in as well as a secondary one. The reason for this is uniclass is on the rise. So uniclass is actually recommended for BIM projects. It's in the BSE EN ISO 19650 series. I think it's part 2, where it recommends using uniclass for that. The main reason for that is it gives a better one-to-one link between the classification and the actual property in the product, in the BIM model itself. Coincidentally as well, it does offer other benefits. So dealing with a specification, if the information's been handed over and it's in the in-use phase, and somebody that might not be a specification specialist, for example, or a curtain walling specialist or window specialist goes into the spec to check something, uniclass actually more clearly identifies what the product is in its unique type. A great example I would use of this, but it's not necessarily directly related to fenestration, would be something like a wash basin. You could look at the N13 spec for that, but you wouldn't know if it was pedestal, wall mounted, countertop, etc., without digging into the spec, whereas the Uniclass code actually gives you a full description of each one. There's a code for each variant within there. We then move into the specification information. This has all been structured to suit the MBS Chorus platform. And again, as mentioned, Paul will be showing you that shortly, but we'll have a data template for each system, product, material, and then the properties from the manufacturer are attributed to that. You can see we can go down and it starts to get to some of the performance criteria. So in this particular case, the air permeability and water tightness and wind resistance all listed within there. Anything that's around fire safety, etc., and sustainability can be added into those. And then we've got some similar products at the bottom. Just looking at a different product, just to show you how it works under a different example, let's have a look for windows. And we can then go and we can start to take a look through some of these. So it might be that I want a wood window unit, and we've narrowed that search down now that was originally almost 1,500 products down to 66. I could then filter by certification if I wanted to, or I could filter by manufacturer. So let's just pick one, Mumford and Wood. We've got some different products of theirs listed within here. Again, let's just pick one. Let's go for this one. So you can see that within this follows exactly the same format as the curtain walling example that we looked at. We've got the third-party certifications listed here against this because the manufacturer has those and they've been uploaded. We could scroll through all of the same types of specification information and the individual data template for that. Or we can use these hyperlinks. So if I just click down to third-party certs, you can see that we've got everything this product has listed against it, and we can take a look at those as and when we need. In respect to the BIM content itself, we can actually access a link to download these here. Now, these are all held in the MBS's National BIM Library. It'll divert to the website here. This will eventually be integrated into Source, but at the moment, the reason it's not is that the library actually connects to all of the BIM software through the plugins that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. So at the moment, these are being downloaded from there. They can be dropped directly into the model, but likewise with the MBS Source listings, we can actually scroll down and all of the data that's required for the BIM processes, so COBie information, if it's a public funded project, has to have this as a requirement. It's mandatory, but it's used widely in other projects as well. You can see that that's all been structured and listed against there. But then again, that specification information is all structured within this listing as well. And people can just quickly download this and that can then be provided to yourselves. Moving forward from this, I can actually show you some of the background analytics. So any manufacturer that subscribes to MBS Source has access to the analytics platform, which ultimately shows you how many times your products have been added to specifications, how many times your objects have been downloaded if you've got the digital object, and who by, etc. It's configurable within the date range here. So you can set that back to from whenever you actually joined MBS, and you can see across the whole timeline. You could look at it for the past couple of days if you wanted to, the past couple of months. This is a general overview. So we've had 22 specifications on this example. Unfortunately, I can't show you an exact manufacturer's site. So because of GDPR, this is just a dummy account, but we can then filter this down to products. You can see that across those 22 specifications, there's actually been 72 different products added within that. We can see here where they are. So if we look at the Sonnery Edu products, it's been added by Alpha Architecture to Newtown Primary in Kent on the 17th. So from a lead perspective, this can actually help you to get your sales teams to actually go through and follow through with that specification. We can see a lot more area now. So if we're actually in that particular product, so this particular product itself has been downloaded by all of these practices on these projects and the dates that are given there. You might notice there's a little bit where it says information not shared. These are usually very few and far between, and it might be where the information security is sensitive on a project, so MOD work, for example, where they physically just can't allow that information to be released. But the majority of them, these are the analytics that you'll see, and it can act as a great lead for yourselves. So that's MBS source and the analytics that are available within it. And from this point, I'd like to hand you over to my colleague, Paul, who's going to give you a demonstration of how the specification process works. Over to you, Paul.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paul. I'm Head of Technical Solutions at MBS, and given the opportunity to demo how MBS Chorus works and the specification process for manufacturer information. And we've got MBS Chorus on screen now. And you can see that it's project-based. So one of the key things is that each of the projects that an organization is working on are visible as their own folder of information. And within there, they can then have multiple different specifications, perhaps depending on the disciplines that they work with, or the parts of a project, and be able to split up the specification in that way. So rather than having to combine everything into one document, they can split that out into work packages and so on. So I've got a demonstration specification here. And within there, I've got a couple of window systems and a roof light system as well. But I'm going to show how easy it is to add content from the specification point of view. So adding content here, if I was to search for something like curtain wall, the search results provide a list of all the information that comes from MBS Chorus and its databases, with all of the different results that are relevant to this search term. So in this case, we've got a couple of different curtain walling systems. And if a user wasn't familiar with curtain walling and wasn't sure which of these to select, on the right-hand side, there's guidance associated with this. And in particular, for something like curtain walling, there's images to show the differences between them, some really quality general guidance about the differences between those systems. And that's authored by our team of technical authors in-house. And again, with that, you can see all kinds of different references to CWCT, and building regulations, and other technical references as well. And that information is kept up to date to ensure that specifiers have the information that they need to work through this. So within the project, I can then just add the relevant system just by clicking on this plus button, and that'll add that to my job on the left-hand side. And within the clause, what's provided for the specifier is what we call a system outline. That's about being systems-based. So there's a few reasons for that. One is that it encourages the idea of thinking about how systems link to one another within a built asset. And so that we're not just thinking about a system in isolation, and certainly not about products supplied by organizations like yourself in isolation, but how they fit into larger systems and the entities themselves. And then thinking about the procurement routes that are involved. Increasingly, we see more descriptive specification, where it's about the system performance, thermals, acoustics, fire performance that's required, and then being able to solve that with a particular product solution. So the specifier has access to all of the information and can begin to fill in this using the drop-down values within MBS Chorus. So here we can see a whole host of different system performance criteria that glazing and windows might have. But the user, if I go to the roof window system here, this window system, sorry, you can see that the user can park the information that isn't relevant at this stage and begin to just focus on the things that they need to specify at a certain work stage of the project. So at a kind of earlier stage, it may just be a case of adding in the parts of performance information that are required. Say, for example, that the critical aspects here are about the thermal performance, the energy rating, and so on. And they can click save. And what this does is not just add this information as text, but actually add clause information to the project, allowing them to continue to go into more detail about the information that's required. But for the user, they'll also see product information within here too. So in this case, there's a number of different window unit types, and they're often defined by what's available from suppliers in the market. So our technical authors are always working with our suppliers to ensure that the content represents what's in the marketplace. And if a user wants to add, for example, wood window units here, they can click on that value, add that chip into the specification. And again, that will add a new clause. And if I jump across to that, you can see again, there's a host of information available for that particular item. To show an example that's a little bit more complete, we've got here roof window systems for something like roof lights. And you can see how the specification might evolve over time. So initially, there might be a description that's more about the kind of client brief, openable roof lights, thermal performance important, visually, there's some requirements there too. And then the type of information that's been added from performance perspective, so fire, thermal, and general system performance. But then getting into the actual requirements of the roof window unit itself, and beginning to think about manufacturer selection too. So within here, we've got a number of different items that need to be met as part of this particular product. And for example, that it's openable, that they want it to be center pivot, to have particular requirements against fire resistance or U values. And it's at this point that the user can begin to see manufacturer information in context. So the supplier's platform, MBS Source, delivers this information directly to MBS Chorus. So they're seeing the most up-to-date versions of this information, and can begin to look at a particular example. Say, for example, this pivot roof window here. It's center pivoted, it has information about the U value that it can meet. And a user can do a couple of things here. One is that they can go into more detail about the clause and see what other variants and other options are available. And if they click on this link, it'll take them to MBS Source, where they can actually see that product within the supplier information. As Lee was showing, all of the general information and options that are available, but also the ability to see the information in comparison to other products as well. So if we go to the manufacturer's products here, within here, we can then choose to select between a number of different items and compare those variants to see how they differ, perhaps in terms of U values, perhaps in terms of the finishes that are available and so on, and see the differences between them. And once a user is happy with the selection that they've made, they can choose to add to spec. So within the platform, they can choose to do that and copy that information and then paste it into Chorus. Or the user can choose to add that directly from the MBS source panel within MBS Chorus, and just by clicking on this plus button. And what it'll do is it'll park a number of the items within the clause and instead replace it with the supplier information. So here we've got the product reference and the information of how to contact the supplier, and that's replacing some of the information that's been added previously, because then it ensures that the information is as referenced by the product that's actually been specified. Within here, it's then important to note that the user can actually begin to save this information for reuse. So where there are generic requirements that might come up commonly, so perhaps pre-authoring information in a generic form for the thermal performance or fire performance of a particular unit, and they can add this to a master's library. So within the platform, there's also the ability to look at the master's information. And within here, we've got projects, but then we've got this tab up here, which is for the masters. And within here, we could have a set of masters. In this case, I've got an example of windows and glazing. But within there, you can then begin to add master information as required from that project. So if we go back to the project that we had before, and then we'll go into this particular file, and I'm going to add the roof window system to my masters just by copying it across. So I choose to copy it to the master, choose the folder that's relevant, and then choose that specification that I'd put together. And what that means is that we then have a copy of that that can be reused on different projects. So a user doesn't have to start from scratch every time. They can begin to add in that information. And in the same way, you could be authoring standard specifications for your users if you have access to Chorus, it means that if there are specific installation requirements and specific technical details that perhaps the designer wouldn't necessarily know, you can provide those and have a library of masters set up to allow you to then import those into their projects. And depending on the permissions that you have and the information that you've been provided with, projects can be collaborative. So you have the ability to add team members, and a user could invite a person to be a contributor to that project. And they can specify just to add that to the particular item that they want you to access. So in that case, that information and the access might be revoked at a later stage, but you can collaborate with the user on developing that specification information. The last thing to show you is the idea of organizational notes. So again, along with the masters and the ability to add content for that, within this particular clause, you'll see that there's a yellow one next to it as well. And that's because the user has put together organizational notes, perhaps about standards that they have within office policy. And again, within your organizations, you could have a set of organizational notes that help users and your teams to specify working on different project types. So in this case, the chosen pitch should align with the illumination requirements. There's a standard distance from the floor, that the ideal is to add more windows to illuminate over larger window sizes, to align with rafter spacing and so on. And within those organizational notes, they can be controlled by organizational admins and kept as a kind of library again of retention of critical knowledge, all of the expertise and knowledge that's been built up from previous projects, any lessons learned, all of that kind of thing. So you create this real wealth of information that then allows you to help and to guide specification choices for users.
So I hope you found that demonstration useful. Really, really powerful platform. Just going to give you a wrap up and summary and then let everybody get on with their days. So a few key takeaways from this webinar. To get specified, engage with specifiers early. This can be through your MBS source listings, but it can also be through BIM content, and ultimately each of those things can help quality specification data. These types of products are clearly high in demand within the MBS platform, and we can help you get your products in front of thousands of specifiers through both platforms, MBS Chorus and MBS Source. So if you'd like to know more, please just drop us a note. And particularly with any sort of listing that you're doing, I think make sure that you're considering and listing information around the safety and sustainability of your products and your business. It's high on specifiers agenda, so whether you're dealing with MBS or not, just take that as a helpful tip and make sure that you're making these things known. For any next steps, if you'd like to know more or have a chat through anything that you've seen today, or you're curious about how something else may work, for example, you can visit the mbs.com/manufacturers. We've got a dedicated manufacturers site. You can give us a call at the telephone number there. We've still got real people that are happy to chat to you based up in our office in Newcastle. Or drop us a note at manufacturers@thembs.com and somebody will get back to you. We can offer different things from sort of technical consultations on what's driving changes to specification, what specifiers are looking for, how you can best position your products. We can give you BIM demonstrations or an overview of that if you'd like to know more. And it's all done on a one-to-one basis. So one of our specialists will be happy to chat through with yourself and your peers. On that note, I'd like to say thank you very much, and I wish you a pleasant day. See you next time.